Welcome back to This Has to Work. In today's episode, we are going to ask, explore, and discuss the question, did we build our ecosystem backwards?
So, Kelly, we had a handful of startups in Alabama with massive exits a few years ago, just between Shipped and therapy brands. It was 1.5 billion dollars out of two exits. And I think people got the sense that, okay, now the floodgates have opened. Birmingham has arrived. Alabama has arrived on the startup scene. Like, it's now just going to be just startup after startup after startup. That didn't really happen. So today in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about why you think that is.
I think a few reasons. I'm going to go way back, but I think the short answer to that question is infrastructure. Infrastructure. So if you go way back, 2011, that's when it was the Obama era initiative, Startup America, right? And that's when you really started to see some momentum in secondary and tertiary markets, really focusing on tech-based economic development, right? And we were one of those. The main benefactors, though, of all of those initiatives that came out of that era were Boston, New York City.
Yeah, hardly what
Silicon
you call
Valley.
Tertiary markets, right? So,
Hardly.
Yeah. So the fifth, sixth, and seventh largest markets in the United States.
Hardly.
Okay.
The ones that continue to win because of the infrastructure. And so that's the main reason. I think, too, we got really excited, right? We had these two massive exits. There was lots of buzz, and we were all just really excited. And also, there had been conversation within the ecosystem was, we need a win. We need a win. And so we had kind of conditioned ourselves to, if we could just get a few wins, that would put us on the map, that would open the floodgates, and then you would see that momentum. Well, then, of course, what we run into is, okay, you have the win, but we don't have at the time, and we don't have now, capital access, right? We don't have the skills to support the growth, right? Even with the work that we were doing with another organization in Birmingham, we were training folks to go into tech careers. I keep wanting to say health tech, tech careers.
I can't imagine why.
Some of the feedback was, this is great, but as a growing startup, we need someone that's a senior level developer, right? And so there's this talent drain. And so, yeah, I think we did it backwards, and I don't think that's exclusive to Alabama, right? If you look at the structure or the hierarchy of how, in a perfect world, economic development, our ecosystem development is supposed to go, you start with just exposure to the ecosystem. Then you work on the skills, right? And then you work on talent placement, so internships, apprenticeships. And we actually, and I bring this up, and it kind of shocks me how many people don't know, in 2018, 2019, I say 2017, 2019, 2020, in doing the economic or workforce development work, we had OJT dollars, which I think still exists, right? On the job training dollars, which is an amazing benefit.
Good question. I do, but I don't know if it's still eligible or not.
Yeah, if you're a startup, look at OJT dollars. Basically, a portion of, if you make a new hire and while they're learning on the job, this program covers the cost of their salary. I think don't quote me, 60-ish%. I'm probably wrong. But it covers up a portion of their salary. There were organizations that had apprenticeship programs, right? You flow into tech through those programs. And so I think the biggest disservice that we did to ourselves was when we had these organizations like Innovate Birmingham. They were funded by a Obama era grant. That grant ran out, right? And outside looking in, that initiative fizzled, right? And there wasn't any backup support to keep it going, right? And it's so disheartening. But also when I see the individuals that went through that program and now they're senior product managers or senior developers, it's just like, this is what it was supposed to do. Yeah. It did the thing it was supposed to do.
But probably just at a smaller scale.
And just at a smaller scale, right? Yeah. And so, and to be clear, there are organizations that are doing that work now. I love Robin Hunt and what she continues to do. There's Quant Hub. They're doing all of this work. But just imagine if we would have kept our focus there for that 4 or 5 years post Innovate Birmingham.
I had a different perspective from the standpoint of it felt a little bit like we had listened to all of this outside perspective.
Say more.
So we had Gary Vaynerchuk, who came in and was a speaker. I use the term speaker loosely because he just did a Q&A and I have thoughts on that. However, he came in and he said that. He said, you need a big win. And I didn't necessarily disagree with that, but it was too simple an answer, which is you have a big win and then what, right? What happens after that? What we didn't see, and part of this is because we just weren't paying attention or we didn't know any better. But typically what happens is you have a big win and then a couple of things happen. So number one, people have some sort of, liquidity event. They made money, right? In the buyout, maybe they had company stock, maybe they were on the cap table, maybe they had options. Whatever the case may be, they now have a little bit of their own kind of golden parachute. They leave, start their own thing, like the guys at Link did. That's a good example of it. They left ship. They had a little bit of cushion financially and started their own thing. And there were probably 2 or 3 others, but that was it. And to the best of my knowledge, the only ones that have really scaled outside of that so far have been Link. And so we didn't really see kind of that waterfall effect from these big companies and an exit to a larger company.
Yeah.
The next thing we didn't see was we didn't see those founders then start to invest back into the same ecosystem as angels or mega angels. They did some work. A lot of philanthropy, to be honest, with those folks, at least that I could tell, but not a lot of investment outside into other companies, outside of other things that they had specific interest in. So, for example, Bill Smith at Shipped immediately started landing, right? No fault. I don't fault him for that. That's great. I'm glad that he started his next thing. But what that prevented from happening was kind of that lull in time that typically happens in ecosystems where somebody has a major exit. They're trying to figure out what they want to do next.
Right.
And in that interim period, they're investing in local startups. They start to play that role as an angel. But he immediately got into landing. And so he tied his money and all of his risk profile back up in the new startup, right? So he's not going to be an angel investor, not at scale. Shagan at Therapy Brands immediately starts HVL, right? Harmony Venture Labs. Investing in companies, but doing it kind of under his own umbrella. Was almost no time between his exit and starting HVL. So that didn't happen. So now we don't have employees that have gained those skills going out and starting their own thing. We don't have those founders with these big exits playing that role of angel or funder, right? Getting those kind of early stage founders started. And then going back to, we kind of listen to the outside voices about what we should do and what we should be paying attention to. And one of the examples of that was when, I don't even remember who it was, maybe it was Brookings, one of these institutes, one of these, intelligent organizations that come in and tell us that we needed to focus on banking, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing. To which I immediately go, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, those folks don't buy from startups. Banks don't buy from startups because they're heavily regulated.
Yeah.
Advanced manufacturing doesn't buy from startups because they bring all of their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers with them.
Right.
Look at what Mercedes did in Vance. Look at what Honda did in Lincoln, right? And I can go down the list over and over and over again. They're not buying from startups. And healthcare, You can talk about how healthcare buys and how hard it is for startups to buy or to get purchased or become vendors in healthcare. So, but we listened to that, and that actually guided a lot of thought. And so maybe we weren't even focusing on the right way and the right things, because 2 of our biggest startup exits had nothing to do with any of those industries.
Right.
But it's like we ignored that.
Yeah.
And so I think we kind of got out of the blocks a little bit funky.
Yeah, I think there's this, to your point, when we saw those big exits, one of the things I was curious about and actually learned from Shagan was the disorientation that happens for a founder when you have a massive exit like that. So when we think about the trickle down, essentially, is what we're saying, right? If you have a big exit, then you become an investor and do all of these things, or you go pursue something else. And it really got me thinking, a community like Alabama/Birmingham, where we've been saying we need this really big exit, or we need that one thing. And I'm always thinking about like the implications on the individual. What type of pressure is that when you are the savior because you had this massive big exit? And I've come to learn that while everyone else on the periphery is really excited about what's happening, for the folks that have had that big win, it is extremely disorienting. And it takes a while to kind of get your footing and your bearings and decide what's next. And you're also, in a way, doing that in isolation. Yeah. Because, quite frankly, a lot of people are in front of you with their hand out, right?
Shagan told me a story that people used to figure out where he lived, would
crazy.
knock on his front door at his home.
Yeah.
Where his wife and children live with him.
It's crazy.
To like ask him to invest in their companies. I was shocked. I mean, I guess it's not that ridiculous to think that happened, but for him to actually say that happened, I literally, it never even crossed my mind. That's nuts.
It's crazy. And it gets me to, the conversation about the angel investing. Do we have accurate numbers of angel investments, or do people tend to keep that close to the chest because they don't want you coming in knocking on their door?
Yeah, I mean, I think angel investing in general is really difficult to track from a data perspective. One, because of exactly what you just said, which is some people will do it and they don't want anybody else to know about it because they may only do it one time, which is the other issue, which is it's very inconsistent. And so there's only a handful of actually formed family offices that are investing regularly on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard to track. Getting back to that idea of a big win being kind of this fix-all, right? Or this catalytic event, it feels like we missed a lot of the things that would have to happen for that to be the case.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ones was something you alluded to at the very beginning, which is where's this talent coming from?
Correct.
Like who's going to work at the next high growth startup? And so back to the premise of the episode, did we go backwards? I mean, I was part of a organization and part of a venture fund that actively went out and tried to recruit startups to the area. Now, I will say this, given the fact that we were focused on pre-seed, we weren't really recruiting companies as much as we were recruiting talent because it was 1 or 2 founders. Maybe there were 3 whole people in the company, 4 or 5 if they were more mature. But really what we were trying to recruit was talent. But it seems like we put it backwards, right? There's an argument to be made that we chase startups instead of really chasing and fostering talent. What do you think on that?
No, I agree with you. Honestly, I don't think we have an excuse when it comes to the talent conversation. I remember being on the panel at Leadership Birmingham, and we got on education. Now, mind you, I am not an education policy person. That is just one area where that's not my expertise. Also, I forgot to give the disclaimer. My opinions are my own. They do not reflect the opinions of my employer, my stakeholders, or my mother.
Well done.
I want to make that to be very
clear. I think the last one, stakeholder, mother, that's really important.
If you are a corporation or even a startup or a growing startup, you should have a connection to the department that is relative to your value prop at UAB, University of Alabama, we have the most HBCUs in Alabama than any state in the country. You should have a presence. If you are a fintech company, then you should have a presence in the School of Business. You should have a presence at Sanford University's School of, you should have a presence on campus. There are so many talented students. And now the tide is changing. I remember wanting to just leave.
Right.
Right. And that's not really the sentiment now. The temperature's a bit different. There is no excuse. And you know what? I am a huge fan. I think the most innovative institutions that we have in the state of Alabama are our junior college system.
Interesting.
They are so flexible and so responsive to the talent needs of our community. And I think we really need to start looking there more when we think about upskilling, when we think about programs that we want to institute institute at scale. The junior college system with the state of Alabama is excellent, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think we have an excuse to not have talent. I'm not sure if we are all doing our due diligence as employers to go out and make ourselves present on these college campuses, on junior colleges, and really get involved even at the high school level, and look at it less of, this philanthropic endeavor that your organization is doing, but you're future-proofing your workforce the earlier you start and get into these institutions. So I think there's some things we can't control, maybe the brain drain, which I think that is more of a quality life issue. One that I think there are some organizations addressing. But when you talk about the talent, you need to have a presence on these institutions and go where these students are.
I also think, too, we have to change our attitude about, especially for, let's call it entry level or for kind of entry point opportunities.
Okay.
One thing that startups have historically done well is hire the young and unqualified. Mm-hmm. And that's out of necessity.
Right. You're broke.
Yes.
You don't have the money.
I can't afford anybody who's old and qualified, right? Yeah. I have to hire the young and unqualified. But I can also point to multiple success stories of people who were put in roles they were not yet qualified for, that learned on the job, that pushed themselves, that went and took courses or studied or read up or took coding classes or figured out how to be product managers or figured out how to market in a digitally native environment for a software startup, whatever the case may be. And every single time, those employees turned out to be some of the most core leadership within those startups over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
I use this example a lot, but I do think it's one of the clearest cut arguments for this exact thing, which is, I mentioned Link before. They hired a student from UAB to literally stuff envelopes and to ship out their digital business cards. I think they paid him like $12, $15 an hour, something like that. He's now the head of procurement and supply chain. He makes over $100,000 a year. And he has equity in the company.
Right.
So not only are we talking about job development, workforce development, talent development, we're also talking about economic mobility.
Right.
This is somebody coming out of school, presumably with some student debt, that now has a way of actually paying that debt back, growing economically, growing professionally. And I think that shouldn't be reserved just to startups. Because the thing that we don't have here is we don't have these huge companies that are basically, this is going to rub people the wrong way, especially any Gen Z or millennial listeners, but they're teaching people how to be professional human beings. They're coming out at 21, 20, 22 years old, and they don't know how to be in a professional environment. They don't know what that hierarchy looks like. They don't know what that reporting structure looks like. They don't necessarily understand the kind of the do's and the don'ts around basic office politics, EQ, around professional EQ, for lack of a better term. But we don't have that here, right? So if you're not going to go work for a bank or an insurance company or in, gravel aggregate provider, there's not a ton of opportunities to get those first 2-3 years of that professional development that then gets translated into now somebody can hire you and doesn't have to teach you those basic things. And you're kind of ready to run in a new opportunity, in a new environment, possibly one with less guardrails like a startup would have. Because we don't have that, then we have to lean more into the young and unqualified.
I think we may have put the cart before the horse, right? I think that was due to, one, excitement and energy, 2, lack of infrastructure, 3, just overall, even though it was great, it's disorienting for everyone. I think that there are organizations that I mentioned earlier that are doing that work to make sure that we have a future-proof workforce. When you look at the landscape now with artificial intelligence, there is no going back. We are here. I think the opportunity as far as skills is, for the most part, we are all starting at the same place because we're all trying to figure this out. Municipalities and states everywhere, countries around the world trying to figure this out. In my mind, that's a very unique opportunity for Alabama, a state that historically has been and remained behind the innovation curve and usually very late to the game, right? Showing up to the party when the lights are coming on, right? Everybody leaving the club, we're just getting to the club, right? In the club, we're all friends. Anyway, so what does that look like for us now? What are some of the opportunities? I think it's that we're all at a level set starting point. I also have a lot of fears because things are moving so fast, right? And there are going to be jobs that are completely automated, and it's going to completely shift our workforce. So what does that look like for us, and what do we need to do?
One thing I will say, if there's a prop bet where you had to bet on talent or technology, I'm always betting on talent. And I think the best technology in the world is fantastic, but it's 80% of what the best talent in the world can do and produce, both from a quality standpoint. Yeah, technology is always going to be probably more productive. From a gross output standpoint, pretty hard to beat technology. But even AI, and AI experts will tell you that, it's 80% good. Yeah. Right. But to be really excellent, I still think requires that talent. So on that, I'll say, great episode. Thanks for engaging in this conversation.
Thank you.
I guess we got to start focusing on talent because we've been focusing too much on startups, and I would agree with that. And so until next time, we'll see ya.
See ya.